Good day and thank you for joining us. Today we're here to speak about the justice system in Armenia, and our guests are Ms. Dr. Michael Naughton, who started the Innocence Network, also Michael O'Brien, who's the author of the book The Death of Justice. The gentlemen are here to share their experience with injustice with Armenia. Welcome and thank you for coming to CivilNet. My first question, you have been in Armenia for a couple of days now, and what are your first impressions about the situation here, speaking of the legal situation?
Well, we've identified a number of key issues. Some have been dealt with already through your parliament, with the new code of conduct coming in, retention of evidence, which is going to be very useful for the legacy cases and other cases in the future. And on the whole, I'm quite impressed, but there still is some way to go on some of the issues.
And have you identified any certain issues other than the retention and destruction of evidence, which has been a major problem in Armenian jurisdiction?
It's been really interesting because, Mike and I came here without much knowledge about Armenia. I was here 3 years ago at a conference about wrongful convictions then, and I've kept in contact with the Armenian Innocence Project since then, Zara. But I don't come here with any particular axe to grind, and then just kind of absorbing the kind of, the atmosphere. And it seems to me that there's an awful lot of effort to improve the criminal justice system here. There seems to be a bit of a reluctance to look backwards. So people keep saying to us whether we go to the state university who are drafting the legislation for the government, or we go and meet with people in the parliament, or we go and speak to the people in the Ministry of Justice, they're kind of saying, okay, great, we may have done things wrong in the past, let's just look forward. And the problem with that is that we've had that experience ourselves in the UK. We had a large bunch of cases. Michael O'Brien's case was one of those cases, which came to a head all in the late 1980s, early 1990s, where politicians were refusing to send cases back to the Court of Appeal to be overturned, not for legal reasons, but because of the political fallout that would cause. And so at that time, Michael made an application to the Minister of Justice in our House of Commons, and then that politician decided to refer the case or not, and they were just refusing to send them back. So the investigative journalists started to do what you are doing. They started making documentary programs about cases. They started having days of action. They started having exhibitions. They started to write about cases in the media and feature cases like on this program. And it caused so much lack of faith and trust in our system that we had to have this review called the Royal Commission on Criminal Justice. And it's our law develops ad hoc, piecemeal, just piece by piece. But this looked at the entire criminal justice system for the first time. And
in your estimation, what role can the media and the public play in Armenia? Because there are differences in the legal system, there are also differences in what the media and public activity in Armenia.
I don't agree. I think that people are people the world over. The work I'm doing, going around talking about wrongful convictions, is that we have the same goals. We want justice, we want the criminal justice system to convict people who've committed crimes, and we don't want innocent people to be caught up in that. We have the same kind of pressures on our law enforcement or our police and prosecutors to win their cases. And I think that it's a very similar experience, and I think that the media in our country and in the United States and other countries that we've looked at is absolutely vital, because the government are not going to start telling the people about injustice.
Yes.
It's the media's responsibility and duty to perform that function. But I just want to say one thing about media. In our country, I don't know about your country, there are two different types of media, or people who call themselves journalists. There's one kind of journalist that seems to just simply report things that they are sent to report about and don't really have a view. And this kind of media is kind of part of the problem. It's the investigative media that's getting to the truth of matters, which is the most important aspect. But there are fears. People don't want to do that kind of investigative journalism because it can be dangerous. It can be dangerous because you won't get work, you might not lose your reputation, you could even get in trouble with the authorities. But unless you're prepared to do that, you can't overturn injustices.
Mr. O'Brien, I was reading your correspondence with Meher Yanokian, and you were pointing out there are similarities in your cases. You've been a victim of an unjust ruling as well, spending 11 years in prison for a crime you did not commit, and you managed to, you know, achieve your freedom, I should say, and well. If we draw parallels between your case and Meher's case, what would you advise and what's the difference and what are his chances at this point in your...
Well, I think it's too early to say what his chances are. We are looking at his case. Some new evidence has been found, and we found out some more new evidence the other day which was brought to light through his solicitor. But the parallels are, you know, when you've got one person saying he did this, it's not enough in our country. You cannot convict on one person's evidence. You've got to have what they call corroborative evidence, like DNA evidence or an eyewitness who actually saw him. There's none of that in Meher's case. And it's very, very disturbing because under the Human Rights Convention, you're entitled under Article 6 to have a fair hearing. And I would argue in Meher's case that he didn't have a fair hearing. And if it was in our country, he probably wouldn't even got to trial.
And in Meher's case, he himself is a journalist, his writing, and that doesn't seem to be helping him much at this point.
No, I mean, earlier we were talking elsewhere, and in the conversation it made me think of another kind of historical time. In Northern Ireland, there was problems between the Catholics and the Protestants, and with the UK. The Catholics were being mistreated, and we call this time the Troubles. And there was terrorism, and there was lots of crime. And throughout that time, 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, there were thousands of people, Catholic people, who were being extrajudicial killings, there was tortures, there was all manner of other crimes. They were being put into prison for things that they didn't do. But yet there is no statistics for the injustices of that time, and there is no public agitation because people were frightened. And I think that when we go out, Mike and I, people recognize him in the street, and we're sitting down and people come up to us and they say, we don't trust the system, but we daren't say anything about it. We haven't met anybody where we've been that actually thinks that the system works, but they're frightened to say anything about it. And when you don't trust the system, you're not going to criticize it because you don't believe it's going to put anything right. So the future of this country, I would say, and it's not my business, but the future of our country meant that we had to deal with what's being called here the historical or the legacy cases. So when Mike made his application to the government and they said no, he didn't go away. These cases don't go away. And they build and build and build, and the media built and built. He had 500,000 words published about him in newspapers. So it's not like you write a story. And then what happened is there was such a crisis that when the new body was set up, that was independent of the courts and independent of the government, the first work they did was to look at their legacy cases from their past, when we weren't so just. And not all of them were overturned, not all of those cases were innocent, but some of them were, and Michael's was one of the first cases.
Well, Armenia's legislative history is relatively new, given that the country just recently gained independence. So maybe we don't have the base, or do we have enough base to go back and look at these cases and make changes?
I think
or the legislative system is still evolving to reach a final point?
I think the legislative, is definitely evolving, but it's not evolving as quick as what most people would like. But I think you will actually get there. It's just, how long is it going to take? How long is Meher going to stay in before you know, his case gets reviewed. You know, at the moment, there is no review body to look at Mahed's case and others which we're aware about, and that seems to be the problem. If it wasn't for the Criminal Cases Review Commission, which was set up in the wake of all the other miscarriages in the UK, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you now, because I too had, like Mahed, nowhere to go. So you've got to have some sort of body which is totally independent to look at these cases, and if for whatever reason mistakes have been made, they have to be put right, and it doesn't matter how long ago they happened. It's so important, you know, justice has got to be done for everybody, not just a select few.
But it's not just that, Mike. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not a question of, I mean, we sometimes talk about legislation and the legal system as though it has some kind of superiority to society. These laws are made by human beings, and these laws are supposed to reflect the values of our society, of the society. And I think that, you know, the idea that there is a legal blockage, I mean, Mike's already said that if you look at the legislation, the human rights legislation, there is principles of fairness, and there are basic principles and standards that you're supposed to apply. There are no modern Western societies that convict somebody or even charge somebody just because somebody says something, right? So I could make an allegation against you, but you have to have corroboration evidence. So you could look at the historic cases and you could say, well, we would not convict that person today. That person has spent 20 years in prison already. So we want to show our society that we're going to draw a line, we're going to move forward and correct the cases from the past. You don't have to feel helpless about it.
Yes, but one of the problems with Armenia is that a lot of the evidence has been destroyed in a lot of the cases. That's why some of the cases that are up for retrial cannot be just.
But it's not about evidence. You don't need evidence. This case, there was just one person's word against another person's word. So you don't need to have any evidence to do DNA testing. This is insufficient. On its face, it's just unjust. You don't need any other evidence.
You're also an advocate of human conditions within prisons. Have you had a chance to get to know the situation? Because the Armenian Human Rights Office has been talking about this endlessly, and it's one of the issues that also needs to be improved.
Well, I think it goes hand in glove with the criminal justice system, really. As you progress on the miscarriages of justices and you know, the bills you're bringing through, you will find the prison system will be, you know, getting better as well. Now, the one thing we identified is having a visit once a year. That has shocked me to the core, because in England you have at least 2 a month. You know, so family ties is important. If you want to rehabilitate prisoners, you've got to keep that family contact. How can you rehabilitate people if you haven't got them family ties? So it's very important, and I hope that will be addressed in Armenia.
The other, I know I don't wish it to sound amusing, and it's not meant to be amusing, but we have legislation and regulation in the UK on the management and transportation of livestock, cows, pigs, sheep, right? And when we hear about the way in which prisoners are kept in Armenia, 5-6 people to a cell which is 3 meters by 5 meters, you could not keep a pig in these conditions in the United Kingdom. It would be unlawful, it would be a criminal offence. So, I mean, we could talk on and on and on. The more you delve into the treatment of prisoners, because as Mike said, we understand prison. You go to prison as your punishment. You don't go to prison to be further punished. You don't go to prison to be treated like that, because you're still a citizen. Your loss of liberty and denial of being with your family and children is your punishment. So most people are going to come back into society. And if you treat people like that, they're going to come back probably worse than when they went in. So you're not protecting society.
And for my last question, any advice to the Armenian society, the media, and also what would you, there's a new draft law being drafted for the legislative system. Any recommendations there?
Well, for the media, I think I can answer that one. I just think they should recognise that they have a big role to play in looking at some of these cases. You know, the Innocence Project is not ready yet to divulge what cases we're looking at, but when the time comes, I do hope that the media will take a look at these cases and investigate them, because I know the damage that wrongful imprisonment does, you know, and being away from the family, and, you know, the destruction it causes. So I do hope that that's one thing of the things which will come out of all this.
I mean, another thing that, I mean, what I'd say finally, from my point, is that often what happens is when you're talking about miscarriage of justice, there's this anxiety that, you know, there is some kind of distress and anxiety for the families of the victims of the crime when you want to talk about reopening the case. But if Armenia is going to learn lessons from everywhere else in the world, whether it be the United States, the UK, Germany, Australia, wherever, right, what we now know is that all criminal justice systems are flawed. All criminal justice systems convict innocent people. And the research that I'm doing now with some colleagues in the United States is through the DNA exonerations. There's been 350 DNA exonerations, so people have been proven to be factually, actually innocent. And of 150 of those cases, we've identified the real murderer. So we've looked into the criminal histories of those people who were at liberty when the guilty person, the innocent person, was serving their sentence. And collectively, these 150 people, they did another 36 murders, 76 rapes, and hundreds of other physical, sexual, and theft offences. So, as painful as it may be, you've got to be alive to the reality of wrongful convictions. You've got to at least review those cases, because if you just ignore them, guilty people are at liberty committing more crimes in your society. So miscarriage of justice should be at the heart of what we call criminal justice.
We should probably start by recognizing the fact that there are such things as innocent convictions.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today, and it was very informative talking to you.
Thank you.